Hello, I'm David Eads with BBC World News. Our top stories: Germany approves Greece's controversial Eurozone bailout. It comes after the first protests in Athens against the new Greek government and its reforms. A prominent Bangladeshi-American blogger known for speaking out against religious fundamentalism has been hacked to death in Dhaka. British security agencies face questions after it emerges that the Islamic State killer Mohammed Emwazi, nicknamed Jihadi John, was brought to their attention 5 years ago. And the US state of Virginia is to pay compensation to people who were forcibly sterilised as part of a long-running eugenics program. Hello, thanks for being with us. The German Parliament has approved plans to extend the international bailout for Greece until June. Now, the deal reached last week between Greece and its partners in the Eurozone was passed by an overwhelming majority in the German Bundestag. The German Finance Minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, had acknowledged that members of the Parliament did face a difficult decision, but he'd also warned them that rejecting the deal would do great harm, as he put it. As for Greece itself, well, this are pictures from before the vote in the German Parliament. This is from Thursday evening. Hundreds of people took to the streets of Athens. There were petrol bombs thrown, shop windows broken. These were protests at the reforms which the new Greek government has been promising and the compromises they're having to make. They're the first demonstrations against the Syriza party since it took power a month ago now. Well, as I say, the German vote is in and it's been decisive. Damien McGuinness is following that for us. As expected, Damien, but I don't know, was it even a bigger margin than you might have thought?
Well, a few more MPs voted no, which wasn't expected. Yesterday, in a run-up to the vote, 22 MPs signalled that they would vote no. In the event, more than 30 actually did. But what was surprising was not the result, it was more the ferocity of the debate. German Parliament debates are often quite sedate and civilised affairs. This one was pretty ferocious. There were lots of catcalls, there was lots of jeering, there was quite a lot of laughing at opponents, and that's because this extension of the bailout, it might be unpopular in Greece, but it's also pretty unpopular here in Germany. Two-thirds of German voters say they actually don't want the extension of the bailout, and only about 20% of Germans say they do. And that's because there's a lot of scepticism here in Germany about whether, on the one hand, Athens will push forward the economic reforms promised, and also whether these reforms are even enough, even if they do go forward. So it's a very controversial debate, and this is now a stopgap for the next 4 months, but it's going to carry on after that. Yeah,
I mean, it's intriguing, isn't it, that we see these pictures of demonstrations and violence once again in Athens because of what they perceive as significant compromises by the Greek government. I presume from a German point of view, those aren't compromises, that's just the base starting point.
Yes, well, I mean, I think what we've seen is that, luckily, both sides have compromised, and that's because both sides know, or they both have the same aim. Neither Berlin nor Athens wants Greece to leave the Eurozone. So both governments are clear that's what they want. Doesn't mean it's popular with the people, but here in Berlin, what is clear is that MPs, even if they're very unhappy about this bailout extension and they're not convinced that Athens will come up with the goods and do what it says it will do, they still feel this is the least bad alternative, because any forced exit out of the Eurozone for Greece would probably be more expensive for Germany, because it'll be even more unlikely that Greece would ever be able to pay that money back. And I think people here in Berlin are very aware about that.
Damien, thanks very much indeed. Damien McGuinness in Berlin. A prominent Bangladeshi-American blogger known for his atheist views has been hacked to death during a visit to Dhaka. Avijit Roy, who lived in the United States, had travelled to the Bangladeshi capital with his wife. He was attending a book fair. He'd received threats before after publishing articles promoting secular views. He had pieces about science and social issues which have been criticised for being anti-Islamic. Well, the police say they're still investigating the killing. Akbar Hossain of the BBC Bengali service gave me more details from Dhaka.
It happened last night when the blogger Abhijit Roy, along with his wife, they were coming out of the book fair in Dhaka. And Dhaka's book fair, it is considered to be one of the largest book fairs in South Asia. And when they're coming out of the fair, they were attacked in the middle of hundreds of people around. And the attackers, they went on, they hacked them, and they confirmed their death, and they just left the scene. And when they were rushed to the hospitals nearby immediately by the people around, and the doctors declared the bloggers dead, and his wife, she received serious injury. And since then, hundreds of bloggers and activists, online activists, they joined a rally in Dhaka in the morning, and they're demanding punishment of the killers who attacked on the blogger Abhijit Roy.
Now, relatives of Western hostages who were beheaded by Islamic State militants say they want the man known as Jihadi John to be captured alive to face justice. He's now been identified as Mohammed Emwazi. British intelligence services have been tracking Emwazi's movements because they suspected that he was trying to travel to Somalia to join Islamist extremists there. This is going back to 2010. He did manage to leave Britain eventually in 2013. He got to Syria, as we know. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner has this.
Jihadi John, now revealed as Mohammed Emwazi, has a history with Britain's security service. A known extremist, he's been on their files for several years. So did they drop the ball?
This is the classic dilemma that security service have, is that you don't know the total picture they're looking at. So while we can look in hindsight and say this is a figure who showed up in other investigations and appears to be linked to a broader community, some of whom are really quite dangerous and ended up in worrying positions, we don't really know how many other people there are in that broader community.
The clues were certainly there. This man, Bilal al-Bajawi, is believed to have had a major influence on Emwazi. As a commander in Somalia's al-Shabaab insurgent group, he helped radicalise Emwazi here in Britain. MI5 knew about these connections. They questioned Emwazi, even allegedly tried to recruit him. It appears to have backfired. He told the campaign group Cage, "But now I feel like a prisoner, only not in a cage in London. A person imprisoned and controlled by security service men, stopping me from living my new life in my birthplace and my country, Kuwait." Questions will now be asked as to how MI5, the security service here, apparently let a known British extremist slip through their hands and head off to Syria to become the infamous executioner, now revealed to be Mohammed Emwazi. But what we will probably never know is how many other jihadists MI5 have successfully approached to become informants, helping to prevent the very large number of failed terrorist attacks here in Britain. Emwazi's role as cold-blooded, sadistic executioner for IS is a blow to the intelligence services. But does that mean they are to blame?
I think the messaging that you're hearing about the role of the security service is a sideshow, and it's an attempt to deflect culpability off Jihadi John. We have to be very clear. This man made a decision for himself to go to Syria, to participate in this conflict, and to behead our own citizens.
Mohammed Emwazi remains at the centre of police murder investigations. He may never be caught. There are also many others behind him giving orders, still at large. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
OK, I want to bring you on to a UNESCO news conference that's just underway now, because UNESCO is calling for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. This is after Islamic State followers were filmed destroying statues with sledgehammers in Mosul. You'll have seen these pictures, I expect, over the course of the last hours. It's a pretty heavy-handed, brutal attack on what some people see as some of the great finds, the great artefacts of ancient times, dating right back as far as the 7th century, although these pictures actually came from an Islamic State video, so we can't verify how many of them are originals and if some of them may be replicas. Nonetheless, the Director General at UNESCO is Irina Bokova. You see her there on the screen. She's holding this news conference, trying to raise further the amount of damage being done to historical sites across the Middle East at the moment. We'll pick up on what she had to say a little bit later here on BBC World News. We've got to catch up with the business, of course, though. Aaron's with us, and we are heading for one almighty budget announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. Big B day in India, David. Thanks. Let me explain. Let's start in India. If you could get it on the queue, that would be great. But let's start with India, where the Finance Minister, Arun Jaitley, is certainly putting together the final touches of his budget. You've got to remember, this is the first budget under the Modi government, for the first full year budget, that is. And, of course, Narendra Modi swept to power with all sorts of promises. He did indeed, with wide support. He got wide support from businesses and investors. But it is going to be a huge financial challenge, let me tell you that, because to keep the markets happier, India needs to do the following. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Keep going! India needs to do the following. It needs to stabilise its finances. It needs to cut the fiscal deficit. That's the gap, of course, between what the country brings in, or the government brings in taxes, and then what it spends. This year, it promised to cut that to 4.1% of GDP, gross domestic product, and that further cuts are expected next year. But here's the problem. In the first 6 months of this financial year, the government already in a bit of a black hole to the tune of this, $71.5 billion. Here's an even scarier figure. The previous finance minister estimated that India has an infrastructure deficit. Of course, the infrastructure spending, everything on new roads, ports, power stations, that deficit standing at $1 trillion. So delivering on election promises is going to require some, serious financial conjuring. And our correspondent, Samir Hashmi, tells us all about the Indian budget in his very own special way. We're going to have more on that coming up on GMT in just over an hour's time. Now, if you're signing up to or creating any internet site in China, you're going to be made to use your real name. Now, internet accounts that impersonate people or organisations will be banned from Sunday. China has repeatedly made attempts to get internet users to register for online accounts using their real names, although I should say with mixed success. The ban on impersonations includes on accounts that claim to be government bodies, such as China's anti-corruption agency, and news organisations like the People's Daily Star newspaper. Accounts that impersonate foreign leaders, such as US President Barack Obama and Russia's Vladimir Putin. That's also apparently a no-no. Airbus profits rose 59% last year. Delays in delivering on its military transporters, the A400M, cost the jet maker, but a record number of passenger jet deliveries helped offset those setbacks. It made $2.62 billion in net profit in 2014. That's up from $1.65 billion in 2013. We've got Tom Enders, the big boss of Airbus, live on GMT in just over an hour's time. Follow me on Twitter. You can tweet me. I'll tweet you back. You can get me at BBC. Aaron, that is it with the business. David, back to you. Good luck.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed. OK, let's catch up on some other news for you now. The parents of 43 students who went missing last September have been leading a march through the streets of Mexico City to demand a full investigation. Thousands of people joined in that protest, as you can see here, carrying banners with pictures of the missing trainee teachers. Prosecutors say the students were arrested by corrupt police officers, handed over to a criminal gang and killed. Now, the practice of eugenics, of creating a genetically superior human population, was championed by Adolf Hitler in his search for a pure race. Well, at one stage, the model he copied was being used across more than 30 American states. Only now, the state of Virginia has agreed to pay compensation to victims who decades ago were sterilised by the authorities forcibly. After a 3-year fight, survivors of the process will be paid around $25,000. Well, let's look at this a little bit more, because with me is Silvia Camporesi, who's a lecturer in bioethics and society at King's College London. Silvia, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Eugenics remains, courtesy of Adolf Hitler in particular, a dirty word. Can we draw a comparison with what's been going on in Virginia? Because it will shock a lot of people to know so many American states were doing that, and for so long.
Thank you, David. This is a very good question. Indeed, often we hear a comparison between eugenics in the past and DNA mitochondrial replacement therapy just recently, or other genetic technologies that we use today to select children in the context of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Now, I do not think that this comparison is justified. Now, in the Western world today, we have something, a concept that in bioethics we refer to as reproductive freedom. We think it is a right of individual to decide when and with whom to reproduce, and also what is good for our children, in this case also selecting children. In the past, in classical eugenics, this was not the case. It was not considered a right of the individual to have reproductive decisions, so the state was justified in intervening in sterilization procedure like the one in Virginia. So many don't know today, but even in Scandinavia, sterilization were going on up until the 70s. So I really don't think that this comparison is justified.
Right, so we shouldn't see it as malevolent as perhaps many of us would see it, but it is that key question, which particularly today we find difficult, freedom or the loss of freedom to decide.
Yes, freedom or loss of freedom to decide. So the negative connotation of the word eugenics is something more recent, a recent acquisition after World War II and the Holocaust. In the 1920s and 30s, eugenics did not have this negative connotation. Quite on the contrary, when the term was coined by Francis Galton, Charles Darwin's cousin, here in London in 1883, it was compared to a secular religion. Society had a duty to work towards a better race. But as I was saying, now we have this concept of reproductive freedom. Parents can choose what is good for their children. So, and they're free from interference from the state, at least in this part of the world.
Right. I mean, you mentioned sort of that as late as the 1970s, these sort of programs were still going on. Is it clear that they are finished now? I mean, that really is history anywhere in the world in terms of the forced nature of those programs.
Yes, yes, this is finished. The Scandinavian countries, we had sterilization law up until the 70s. The fact is that often we don't hear this kind of discussion, but for example, in Scandinavia, the history of eugenics went hand in hand with the history of the welfare state. So society thought, okay, we are giving benefits to certain communities, but we are also putting weights of other members of the community, and that was considered okay. And the sterilization were for those part of the population that were considered feeble-minded. I don't know if you've heard this word, but it was an umbrella term that was a catch-all term for many disabilities, but also for categories of exhausted mothers. Mother who had too many children could not take care of their children anymore. But again, when we hear eugenics, we read it in the news in comparison with mitochondrial replacement therapy or genetic technologies. I would be wary of this comparison.
Okay, and times change, don't they, Silvia? Thank you very much indeed, Silvia Caporesi. Well, I hope you'll stay with us here on BBC World News. We've got a lot more still to bring you, including, I'm afraid, the ugly side of Russian football as the country prepares to host the next World Cup in 2018. More in a moment. You're watching BBC World News. I'm David Eads. The latest headlines. German MPs have approved plans to extend the international bailout for Greece. That's after the finance minister asked them to make a difficult decision and back Athens. A prominent Bangladeshi-American blogger known for his atheist views has been hacked to death with a machete during a visit to Dhaka. Russia is to host the next Football World Cup, and with 3 years to go before the finals, FIFA has called the level of racism in the Russian game completely unacceptable. Well, our Moscow correspondent, Sarah Rainsford, has been investigating the extent of racism on the terraces.
Football fans in Russia are a fervent bunch. These will clearly be enthusiastic hosts for the next World Cup. But there is an ugly side to the game here. The Brazilian striker, Hulk, was the first non-white player that the St. Petersburg side Zenit ever signed just 2 years ago. Even then, there were protests. But racism in Russian football goes beyond one club. When Zenit played in Moscow, we heard these sounds. monkey chants from fans on both sides when a black player got the ball. Hulk told me racial insults are common. He's complained officially more than once.
If this happens at the World Cup, it will be a problem. I think there should be respect, because we are all the same. This happens because of ignorance and a lack of culture.
Zenit's opponents, here in red and blue, had just played 3 matches to empty stands. UEFA's punishment for violent and racist conduct by fans.
There's no doubting the enthusiasm of fans here in Russia for football. There is clearly huge passion here for the game. But fans' behaviour, their attitudes have long been a problem in the Russian game, and ahead of the World Cup, that's a huge challenge.
Hosting the 2018 Cup is a matter of prestige for Moscow, which laid on a glitzy launch for its logo. But it's already faced calls for a boycott over Russia's intervention in Ukraine. Now there are questions over conditions here for black players and fans. FIFA told us it's concerned. Senior Russian officials tend to play the problem down.
Это не российская проблема. У нее в России она не стоит.
It's not a Russian problem. It happens in stadiums all over the world because, sadly, that's the way the world is. But in Russia, it's not a very serious issue. Yeah, sometimes fans shout racist things, but we take measures. We fight it like all the world.
Back at the match, the crowd see racism as a social issue as much as a sporting one. Jan tells me football fans are not good little boys, they're lads from the streets who may have radical views. It'll take time, he said, to change that. FIFA wants zero tolerance of racism at the World Cup. Russia is still a long way off that. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Moscow.
Right, I want to bring you an update on a story that we've been focusing on over recent days, the capture of as many as 200 members of the Assyrian Christian community by Islamic State. That actually happened on Monday. Well, fighting goes on between IS militants and local Kurdish forces in the area. This is in northeast Syria. Reports saying churches and houses have been burned down. These pictures have actually just come into us. They are pictures from the villages where the attacks took place. So you can see a lot of Assyrians trying to escape from their homes to take refuge in the city of Hasaka. Local churches have been offering what help they can to displaced people. An Assyrian activist from Al-Hasaka has told us the number of people seized is more than 280, and there are still 20 families trapped in one of the villages. Prince William has paid his respects to soldiers killed in Japan by laying a wreath at a Commonwealth War Graves cemetery outside Tokyo. The Duke of Cambridge then went on to meet Emperor Akihito, as our royal correspondent Peter Hunt reports.
These are striking tombstones, flat, not upright because of the risk of earthquakes, at a cemetery for the Commonwealth soldiers who died at the hands of the Japanese in the Second World War. Prince William, a future king, was here to pay his respects to those who died fighting for a country he's destined to lead. Many of those buried here were prisoners of war. 1 in 3 of those captured by the Japanese didn't survive their time in the camps. On his wreath of chrysanthemums, William wrote of the need to never forget all those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. After the cemetery, an encounter between the representatives of one ancient institution and another which is even older. Indeed, Japan's Emperor Akihito, here with his wife, hails from the world's oldest hereditary monarchy. He's just an emperor. Previous Japanese monarchs had the status of living gods. Later today, there'll be a change of scene and focus when Prince William will celebrate British-Japanese links, and he'll attend a reception where the guests will include several famous sumo wrestlers. Peter Hunt, BBC News, Tokyo.
Well, that should be entertaining, shouldn't it? Thanks for watching BBC World News.